Hey, what's up, everyone? This is your host, Mahfouz Chowdhury. I'm here with my co host, Camille. Welcome to Chapter 11 of the Modern Mindset Podcast. We're excited to be back. You're doing an evening session today rather than a morning one. So, we're really going to test our energy levels as we went through an eventful weekend. But nonetheless, I'm really excited to get into today's discussion. I wanted to check in with you, Camille, being that we're doing an evening session today, not our usual wake up in the morning, chug a cup of coffee, and we're good to go. How are you feeling? How's your weekend been?
Yeah, my weekend has been crazy. Been a lot of fun. Very tiring though. So it's my bad that we're doing it late because I've been running around. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'm pretty sure it's going to turn out well. Just got to go through it.
You're not late at all, man. We are recording our sessions to put it up Monday morning for people to kick off their week with amazing content. And I guarantee you that we're going to continue to deliver that every step of the way. And is it just me, or does October get like insanely spontaneous, busy, and unpredictable all of a sudden? Like, I don't know where it happens. Every single year, I feel like as we're approaching Halloween, it's usually that time where things just get pretty crazy. But it's been the same on my side as well. I've announced just a couple weeks ago that over the next 4 weeks, I am speaking at 10 different events, and that is starting to really challenge me and take a toll on me in terms of my energy level. So I'm really spending time trying to unwind when I'm offline and really allowing myself to get the energy back. You know, the first time I experienced this was when the Clubhouse app came out for the first time. I remember I got really excited because Clubhouse was this hot app that everyone is jumping on. It was the talk of the town, and I went full force right into the app and I said, "Listen, I'm going to catch up because I'm behind. I'm going to do a session every single day for 30 days just to get my feet wet and get my foot in the door." And man, did I learn really quick what it feels like to get a punch in the mouth from reality, reminding me that I got to put my energy levels on check. And I had to take a step back and recalibrate that really quickly. So this time I'm a little bit more prepared. I'm watching my energy levels. I'm paying attention to how I feel each day. And I'm making sure that I prioritize the things that are also allowing me to boost and gain some of those energy levels back as well. So this is a it's a very big deal and to an utmost importance for me. But what about you, Camille? Like, what are some things in your life that you've kind of gone through where you've underestimated the amount of energy that it takes, and then all of a sudden you get wiped out? You know, you get a slap from reality reminding you that you need to take a step back and reassess. Is that Do you find that to be more on the physical activities or elsewhere?
Yeah, I think for me, there have been a couple times where it's been physical, and that was when I was doing training in the military reserves. So yeah, there was burnout there, and in fact, like I got injured. So a little bit too much, but like actual real burnout was probably like in med school when I was studying for my board exams, and I was studying like upwards to like 8 hours a day and still doing crazy intermittent fasting, where almost one meal a day sometimes, working out, and even like shadowing doctors. And sometimes I would shadow like a doctor during surgery for 12 hours, come back home, work out for another hour, eat, and then just study for the rest of the day and rinse and repeat for a month. And the whole study process was I dedicated 12 weeks for that board exam. But man, like when it's stacked along with everything else, like with the shadowing of the doctors, with all the exercise, I just completely underestimated how much that would take a toll on me. And the studying itself after that board exam, I couldn't crack open a book for months, like not effectively. It was a miracle that I even passed like some of the courses in med school afterwards, because I did this during the summer, and then jumping back into med school again was really difficult. And then I did it again with studying for the next board exam. So I'm pretty bad when it comes to like studying that, but this time around I'm a lot better. I only was burnt out for maybe 2 weeks out of this last study session, as opposed to months or even 5 weeks with the last one. So getting better.
Yeah, the beautiful thing about going through those experiences is that you come back a little bit better equipped the next time around. Either a little bit more cautious with the way that you're navigating through it, or you're just stronger. Like you're mentally stronger, you're physically stronger, and you're able to take on a bit more. And you're almost pushing that threshold a little bit further out than it was the first time around. But you also get that sense of like intimidation the first time you return to that thing that kicked your ass, right? Like I remember that even when I recorded the first season of my podcast show Ride With Me, I remember that I took off more than a year. You know, I didn't expect to take off that long. I thought I'd come back sooner, but sometimes life happens. And then I remember when I turned on the microphone, like I had this like feeling of anxiety go down my spine. You know, the chill that said, "Oh my God, I remember the work and the energy and the tiredness I had to go through to push this out. Do I have to do it again?" Like you get that instant feel of anxiety. And I remember my first episode back was me turning it on saying, "Is this on? Can you hear me? Is anyone listening?" As if like I was in this like deserted island and I'm like no one out there is listening anymore. Like you get that feeling of anxiety when you pick it up the first time, man. And it's uh it's a battle of those extremes. I really think is what it comes down to. And it almost comes down to like who the louder voice is or who where you are in your life that makes you determine which voice to listen to. Like will you let the feeling of anxiety win and tap out and not actually follow through with redoing that item, or will you actually have the courage to battle through it and jump back on top and get your rhythm and maybe find out very quickly that you got even better? And I think this is where this is something that we all experience quite frequently in our lifetime, and it's worth bringing it up, which I think is going to be a great conversation today, Camille, as we spend our episode, chapter 11, dissecting better resilience. And you brought it up to me just a few minutes ago before we hit record, as that being the topic of the day. And it's interesting you said that because I put out content earlier today, and I didn't realize we were going to be talking about this, but I was kind of thinking about this anyways. It was just in the back of my mind, and I put out a post and I said, some days you will fail a few steps. Some days you will fall a few steps back. Other days you will crush your record numbers. Just because outcomes aren't consistent doesn't mean you shouldn't be. Right? The realization that you could be doing the same thing every day and you could get different outcomes depending on the randomness of the day, especially when it's relying on external factors to give you that outcome. You may not get the ideal outcome. You may get outcome that is not what you wanted, but it's whether or not you stay consistent with it or keep working on it that's going to make the difference of whether you get better outcomes. And it's it's a little worrisome when you think about how many people give up on that first time that they fall down, or how many people are afraid to take another risk because a risk in the past hasn't really favored them. I'd love to get your thoughts on the entire conversation of resilience. You know, I was kind of reflecting back on it earlier today because I went to the gym earlier today and I didn't have a great workout. You know, I was putting up lower numbers than the time before and I thought I'd be stronger today. So I had to almost give myself a pep talk. You know, this content was almost written more for me than for the audience. I wrote it to remind myself that some days will suck, but other days will be amazing and I just got to stay at it. What made you think of resilience today? I'm curious if something happened on your side of the world as well.
With me, I thought it would just be a very good thing to talk about, especially given the last episode was about legacy, because resilience is part of that. Whenever you chase a goal, naturally you're going to make mistakes and naturally you're going to fall, and life happens too. And it's about getting up and becoming better. So resilience is a huge part of that. I feel like there were so many times in my life where I could have stayed down and it would have been absolutely miserable. And when I got injured in the military reserves, that was pretty much my life was over. Like that's what it felt like, because I had this idea, I had this whole plan for my life. I'm gonna go into law enforcement. I'm gonna stay in the reserves, and I'm just gonna do my best in that field. And this is always what I've wanted, to be able to serve and protect. And then that was taken away from me because as I was injured, there's no way I can get hired on in law enforcement because I'm a liability, and that had to become real to me. I was in denial for the most part, and even with my own limitations and the chronic pain, that was also a huge thing. Is I thought the surgeries would correct it and no more pain, and the surgeries did correct it in a way, but there was still all this lingering pain. And what a lot of people don't know about chronic pain is there's everyone expects to have zero pain, but if you're someone that suffers through it, you have to learn to accept that it's just going to be there. And there are ways to reduce it, but if you start focusing on it has to be zero pain, you're never going to be able to move on and do better things with your life. So having that acceptance of that made it very important in my life in the future and like how I'm navigating through, because when I was injured and when I was having all that pain, I was young and I didn't know what I was doing as well, and I naturally turned to alcohol and opioids. So I got addicted to oxycontin, and I would mix it with alcohol a lot, and then I would drink alone, and I get drunk 3 times a week for like a better part like a year. And I didn't realize like all this damage I was doing, and I was telling myself this is the way I'm getting better because I'm numbing out the pain, and I'm happy for once instead of being miserable all the time. And the whole time it was just staying in that place and actually getting worse. My health was deteriorating. I got well, steatohepatitis, so my liver was getting inflamed because of all the fat in there, and the alcohol doesn't help as well. And I just became more and more miserable, more and more depressed, and more anxious, and it was creating, it was making my life just worse. And it wasn't until like I learned how to push myself a bit more that I start to like rearrange my life in a way that I can actually live and thrive off of it. And even doing so, I still was like failing a lot, like because then I had to find a new career path, and so I went for well, I wanted to be a psychologist. Then I thought psychiatry, so I wanted to go through med school, and I had to redo all my high school courses and go through the undergraduate degree process. And it's a huge jump from being a guy that has never studied science before, and pretty much like even like almost failed out of like a couple high school courses because I skipped all the time, to actually working hard and like reading and trying to memorize all this stuff. And I was miserable too because I was like, I'm not smart enough for this. I'm not equipped, and I'm older than most of the people in my class, and I had to learn how to manage those expectations and actually move forward, go past the anxiety, and eventually create a life that is worth living. And so I think resilience is about, getting hit and knocked down, but coming back up. And that's a skill that's invaluable in everyone's life. And everyone has a story like that. It's just no one wants to talk about the ugly parts. But, these are where the lessons are. And moving forward with that, you could integrate that with part of yourself to make you more whole. So I think that's the main reason why I brought it up, and why I think you and I talk about it a lot. It's very important.
Your story makes me think about a visual that I once saw posted on social media, which was a photo of a professional juggler, and you could see the image of the guy from his back performing his act in front of a huge crowd that's applauding him, and he's flipping around plates, and you can't believe how flawlessly he's flipping them around, and it just looks like he makes it look so easy. Like everyone's just shocked by how great he is. But then the beautiful thing about this image is because you're looking at him from the back, you can see all the things that he's standing on that the others can't see, and it's got words on every single step. It's got like failure, giving up, emotional breakdowns, burnout, da 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 da, and it's like the beautiful thing about this visual is it had shattered plates all over these steps, and you can almost see that the visual and the symbolism of the guy working his way up and then performing his act to the crowd, but the crowd has no idea of everything he's gone through. So they just think it was easy for him, or as people will say, like, oh, he's just a natural. Or as we often hear in our world, oh, you just got lucky, or you're so lucky that this happened, not realizing all the other things that happen in the back end. And I think that's so true. Not only the fact that everyone has a story, I would actually say more people have more failure stories than success stories. I know I do. In fact, I think it's tenfold. I think I have 10 times more failure stories than success stories. And this brings up the lack of sharing of this brings up a lot of problems in our world from a level of comparison and anxiety that I'm sure we're going to spend some time digging into and diving into during this conversation today. But the where I wanted to kind of go with this was just a recent memory that just happened. I brought my girlfriend over, and I introduced her to my parents, and we had a great dinner together. And my dad was kind of talking about my childhood story, and he was bringing up things that even I don't remember. Like, he was talking about the fact that I used to be really, really good at math when I first came here to this country. And I'm now like the guy that goes out there and jokes to audiences about how I'm bad at math. And this is why I chose marketing and public speaking, but I don't talk numbers. Like, I use that in my speaking because I really, really believe I'm not great at math. But my dad was reminding me that when I first came here, I was so good that when they had those parent teacher nights, they would actually tell him that I'm gifted in math, and they actually bumped me up a couple grades in that class. And I don't actually remember that until my dad brought it up. And I was like, you know what? I do actually kind of remember that. And it was interesting to think about uh, the mentality that I had around that. And it brought me back to something that I remember seeing as an advantage once upon a time, but now I always see this as the fear of losing to someone else that comes from another country with the same hunger. Is the fact that you come in as an immigrant and you're at your peak hunger state. Like, you just got out of a very, very difficult situation. You're being promised this land of opportunity. You arrive here, and now you have the ability to actually not only be grateful for the fact that you left behind a terrible place, but the ability to build your life from scratch starting today. And they're at the age where they're able to actually make some good decisions, and they're already hungry enough to really fight for it. And I remember when I came here, I started at grade 3 and 4, and I had that hunger. Like, I couldn't believe how quickly I was lapping the students in my class, because the students that were raised here were too comfortable. They didn't know what it felt like to get punched in the mouth. They didn't know what it felt like to fail hard. And because of that, a lot of them were very, very comfortable, and I was lapping right by them. And I suppose over the years, especially from the education side, I got a little bit comfortable because I started forgetting how bad things used to be there. And that advantage that I used to have in the world of mathematics or anything else started dissolving. And thus, as a result of that, that's no longer my strong suit, although I can still argue that other failures have given me new strengths that I really, really bank on today. But I always think about the next hungry immigrant that comes in here with that same mentality, that same blood dripping down their mouth, saying, I know what I've gone through, and I'm not going to let anyone else stop me from getting it. And it because of that reason, resilience is one of my favorite words. I always put reinvention as my favorite word on this planet, but I would say resilience is definitely in the top three, because if your only superpower in this world was resilience, how in the world can you be defeated? If all you had was the mentality of, I don't care how many times I drop, I'm going to get back up until I figure out a way, how in the earth can you be defeated? And I think that a lot of people have the issue of when they get knocked down, they stay down, or they get knocked down a few times and they lose hope. But the one that is that resilient individual, they're able to get up over and over again. And through persistence, they're able to finally make it to the other side. I think that part of the conversation isn't shared enough. And because it's not shared enough, the level of fear and the ability to lose your hope starts happening a lot quicker than I would think. But you also kind of came in here from in a different way, like the way you were raised here. I remember you mentioning in a previous episode that you almost had it easier when you first came here, right? Like, your parents were helping you out a lot with a lot of the things when you were younger. Did you kind of have that same feeling of drive, starting from scratch? Did you have that high level of ambition when you saw what the world was like when you first came here? What was it like from your childhood in that perspective?
I was born here, and my parents emigrated from Poland because they were escaping communism there. When Poland had the communism, like for a brief time, it was really horrible. So I
Were
was
you
born.
were you aware at a young age of how bad things were when you were born here? Like, did your parents really sell you that story of what happened, or did you just have no idea as a young kid?
No, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't ask either. I wasn't really curious. I I didn't really have a drive. My That being said, my mom always pushed me to like study hard, and since I was behind with reading and speaking in general, I didn't start speaking till the age of 3, and I was on like ESL programs, but then I had to do like additional reading stuff because I was behind in reading as well. So at when I'd come back home, my mom would encourage me to like do my homework, but actually like do a lot, repeat it a lot, and I was very slow at it too. So I wasn't sold on this dream. I didn't have that hunger to achieve more. It was just told to me that you got to work hard, and you'll get what you want. So I guess I did get that natural kind of diligence and kind of effort put into like schoolwork and academic performance. And there were incentives like if I brought an A on my report card, then I would get like $5 or something like that. And that was always in the household, but I didn't necessarily have the hunger, nor did I know how bad life can get. Like for instance, if you don't have the essentials. It wasn't until like when my parents divorced and then my mom was struggling with some stuff that then it became a bit more apparent. But it wasn't at that level where I actually had that drive.
Yeah, it's interesting that some people actually will live it, and some people will be told how hard it used to be, and you can kind of see like what is it that drives them at the end of the day. And I don't want to credit that we came from Saudi Arabia during difficult times being the reason I'm driven today. I can't honestly say that that's still in the back of my mind, like, hey, it was that bad. What I just think about is the humble beginnings of where we started. Like when we first arrived here, we had a tiny, like one and a half bedroom apartment. Saying two is even overselling it. It was like a bedroom and a den
Oh.
with four of us. It was me and my three brothers and my parents. And I remember like the apartment was really beat up. As a matter of fact, I'm not that far away from it. Like once in a while, I still drive by it, and it really reminds me how bad it used to be. So I think about that being like the driver of how far I've come. And there's conversations that you have along the way, or life lessons that you have along the way, that will either keep you fired up or it'll slow you down because you all of a sudden feel like you made it enough that maybe you don't need to push a little bit harder. I was actually thinking about this earlier today too, which is an interesting conversation around resilience. Which is, I remember like last year, you and I sat down and we were kind of just having a really lengthy conversation about our past relationships, and I brought up one of my relationships, and this was a relationship I was having while you were away in Poland. So you were kind of like, hey, I actually know nothing about her. Like, what's she like? Tell me a little bit about her. And I was very, very honest where I said, I will be honest with you, I have no idea. Like I actually started forgetting her very, very quickly because of the fact that I was working on myself and trying to move away from that memory, not realizing that what I actually was doing subconsciously was burying that memory to a point where I don't remember it anymore. And I remember you asked me something really interesting as I was telling you that I'm forgetting these memories. I'm moving forward. You followed it up by asking, aren't you worried that by forgetting these memories, you also forget a part of yourself? And I thought that was a really, really intriguing question. And I don't know if I said it exactly to a T, but it sounded good. So you can take credit for the way it
Sure.
sounded. But I remember you asking that, and it was a really interesting point. And as you can see, it still sticks with me. Like I still think about what you asked, because what you asked was, I think, something that a lot of people do when they have a bad memory. They do everything that they possibly can to bury that memory and forget it. And they want to forget it to a point where they can't even describe it anymore, even if they tried, which I can tell you that I probably very successfully did it for that relationship because it just wasn't a great experience. But the lessons get lost too. And I think that's worth mentioning. Like when you get knocked down and you know how to get back up and you know how next time not to get knocked down, if you remove that entire memory, you forget how bad it felt when you got knocked down. You forget how you navigated through it the next time. You forget all those parts of you. You just remember that you're not getting knocked down anymore. But what happens the next time that happens again? Are you prepared? Are you able to bounce back? Are you able to remember the things that happened? And are you able to remember how bad it felt so that you work even harder to not get back into that state? That was a really interesting question that you asked. And I'm curious about this because I've been asking myself this too. How many other things in your past do you think that you can't describe as well as you want to, like when it used to happen? So like the way that you described your experience with the military, the injury. In a previous chapter, you talked quite a bit about your battle with depression, and you were very, very detailed to a point where I'm amazed by how much you remember. But I'm sure something that painful in your life is quite scarring and it'll stay with you. But do you feel like there's a lot of things that happen that maybe you don't remember? And do you feel like you lose the benefits of what you could have had if you did remember very, very well?
For me, it depends because for sure I've forgotten details, and there are some important details that probably would have changed the story around it. I think it really does depend on the story attached to the memory, and if that story is one of being a victim, and I keep feeding all these facts and telling and then twisting all this information to make that narrative come true, then naturally I'm missing out on the lesson there from the other stuff that I'm leaving out. And maybe I'm willingly doing that. And maybe it's not forgetting, it's more repressing and not being honest and accepting that part. However, when it comes to not remembering, yeah, I also agree, but that's the problem with memories. You can't, and sometimes actually just revisiting that memory after digesting all the emotion around it, you can pick up more, and that's when it gets exciting too, because then you can acknowledge these like things that might make the memory more beautiful or might make the lesson more accurate, because a lot of times too with these traumatic experiences we look at it as a way to, as soon as we feel an emotion that's similar, we run away, or we try our best to say, okay, now this is a challenge, and we can completely negate a meaningful experience from that, because it could just be, for instance, like a normal thing when I used to get anxiety attacks walking down the street. So when I walk down the street and I feel that, I can just run away and avoid it, or I can do other things like face it and allow myself to digest it, because the thing I could be missing out on is an opportunity to one walk into some like an old friend, have a conversation, reconnect with them, or like say hi to my neighbors or whatever, and just enjoy the walk. Instead, I'm allowing myself to completely run away just for the sense that these feelings are uncomfortable and I want to avoid them the best I can. But the story's not complete, because I'm telling myself I get anxiety attacks walking down the street, but I didn't admit to myself now the situation, the person who I was back then, first of all, and the circumstances around that. Those details are lost. And if I still live the life I'm living now in the present, based on all the circumstances of the past, then I'm not able to move forward. Because all I am saying is I'm stuck as this person here and I'm not able to grow. I'm not able to actually thrive from that. So it's very important, like especially with anxiety, when you realize that you have this kind of resistance where you don't want to do something and you wonder why, or you get like this weird sensation, or sometimes even for me, what I discovered with skydiving is I went completely numb. I felt nothing. And that's also a manifestation of anxiety. It's just when you don't allow yourself to process those emotions because they're uncomfortable, or you just become disconnected from yourself because that's what you normally do and you're not aware of that, you miss out on so much. And on top of that too, you don't allow yourself to be you. You don't build that confidence. Instead, you regress and you become less confident in yourself. So with me, I think it's important to like hold on to those memories dearly and actually allow yourself to visit them in a way that is productive and helpful. But then, of course, there are exceptions, like people with PTSD, then it becomes intrusive and it becomes too much. So if it's that to that extreme, then of course have a professional look into that with you. So I think I'm gonna settle with I wish I could like remember everything like 100% and have that kind of memory like drilled in even with the emotions around it. And sometimes what I do like to do is kind of look at who I was back then and try to become that person again when I'm revisiting that memory, so I can one I could be more kind to that person. I have more empathy for what's going on, and maybe that way I can revisit these the memory in a way that'll unlock more details that I'm not aware of at this point, or even maybe I'll even remember things I wasn't aware of at that moment, and then that would allow me to have more of the lesson integrated within myself, so I could carry that on moving forward.
There's this terminology that we sometimes hear in psychologists in psychology and in personal development around shadow work, right? And shadow work is it's scary to a lot of people because a lot of that involves revisiting the past, and I think the outcome of what you leave with happens more to do with where you are in your current state of being, right? Your mindset at the current moment. Because some people, by holding on to those past memories, you're also having a hard time letting go of it. You're having a hard time moving forward, and you're in many ways letting that be your blame, letting that be the root of why a lot of things are not being done in your life. And I think that's worth addressing as well. And I like what you said, which is approaching them in a way that's productive. I thought that was a very interesting way of stating it, because that's really what I think where lies the benefit is having an objective and an intention. Like, why are you going at it? Are you going at it for the right reasons? Because like you, I wish I had more things written down. This is why I'm such a big fan of putting out content every day, because I like that. I just shared the story with you about what my dad said about me when I was better at math. I'm not going to remember that months from now. In fact, I almost forgot. It just came back into my mind for a split second. And I don't even know if I did a good job paraphrasing exactly how he said it. So I know that memory is not going to stay in my mind for long. So the fact that I put it out here fresh out of my head into an episode, it's beautiful that I can come back to it, not only listen to and remember the memory, but also listen to how I felt about the memory and what it made me think about at that time. And this is why I think there's a great opportunity for always documenting things that happen in your life. For some people, it's journaling. For some people, it's putting out content on social media. For some people, it's about doing things like this, like a podcast. And even if the podcast is not to share it with the world, you can still record your own thoughts and keep it in private. You can even have discussions with other people around it. And it may not be as effective as you writing it down, but at least there's pieces that you can pick up from a memory a friend may remember. And there's just a lot of opportunities for you to hold on to that memory, but always remembering that when you're going back to that memory, you're going at it for the right reasons. And usually for me, first and foremost is for the conversation around gratitude. Like, I want to actually see how far I've come. I want to see how bad I used to be and how much better I became at something. And I want to remember and be grateful for the fact that there's progress, because once you see that you can get better at something, you also know you can keep getting better at it. So just having that proof that's showing you that you've actually evolved from where you used to be is a great motivator to keep you going, so that if things go wrong, you can remember, like, hey, I've done it before, I can do it again, which is actually a big mindset that I have. Once I've picked myself up from my worst days, I now believe I can pick myself up from anything. And, the next time my heart gets broken, the next time something doesn't go right, the next time an initiative fails, I've gone through all of those and I know I've recovered and I've done even better because of it. So I actually welcome those, and I'm very, very confident to be able to bounce back from it because of that. But I also think that there's the other level of why we revisit memories, and sometimes it's because you want to remember the fact that, like, there's a lot of lessons that came out of it, but when you go through those emotions the first time, it's hard to, I guess what I'm trying to say, which is difficult to talk about sometimes, but I'm trying to say that when you go through those difficult situations, like, you make rash decisions while you're feeling those emotions, right? And it's hard to actually know if you made the right decisions. And it's also hard to know if you actually did the right thing. But when you get an opportunity, whether it's weeks, months, days, or years later, to revisit that, you're almost doing that retrospective meeting that allows you to do it with a level playing, like a level head situation, right? You're opening that door again, And you're looking at it in a way where you're saying, I'm not angry anymore. Did things actually happen the way it was supposed to? And what was my lessons from it? Did I actually do the right thing? And I think that's a question a lot of people don't ask themselves. I came out of my one of my worst relationships that I've ever been in, a 3.5 year relationship. And I remember leaving that relationship absolutely hating the other person. And for a very long time, I blamed her for who I was being. I blamed her for my anger issues. I blamed her for my jealousy. I blamed her for my insecurities. And because of that, I started even disliking her even more. And somewhere down the road, that thought process has changed. And that thought process has changed because I realized that first it went from me disliking her to then asking myself, like, what if I was the problem? Like, what if I'm the reason that that relationship didn't work? What if I actually wasn't being a good boyfriend? What if I actually wasn't doing my part and I'm blaming her for a lot of those things? And that was that first step of that evolution where I realized I was growing up, where I was starting to ask, like, what if it wasn't her fault? And then what actually happened uh, many years after our breakup is that I touched base with her, and I realized that it was time for me to move forward. And the only way I can let go of all these hatred and pain and these difficulties that I was having was to actually just touch base and get some closure. And this was, I think, one of the biggest parts that I wrote about in my book that I had a hard time writing about because it I remember when I was writing my book, I even had a very difficult time revisiting those emotions because it didn't feel good thinking about how hard that was, especially because I was trying to write it like I was in the present. I was really trying to see it through the eyes of this young Mafuz that was going through a difficult time. But then when I met up with her many years later, we've lost touch. We have no idea what's going on in each other's life, but we met up at a Starbucks and we sat down for coffee, and it was the moment that absolutely changed my entire way of thinking when she went into her bag and pulled out a shoebox. And this inspired the chapter in my book that I called Shoebox. It was a shoebox that she pulled out, which was actually a shoebox that we built together in our relationship many years ago. We actually filled the shoebox with a lot of our memories, the letters that I wrote her, the letters she would write me, the gifts that we would get each other, little symbolism and memories that started coming back when she started pulling these out one at a time. She gave me a letter that I opened and read for the first time. Like, imagine being able to read a Camille letter from like early high school days, man. Like, it's pretty crazy. I don't even know what I would say at that age, and being able to read it from the words of someone that wrote it at that age. Camille, I gotta tell you, it was at that moment that I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I was being the best I could possibly be in that relationship. And I knew for a shadow of a doubt, reading her letters, that she was trying her best as this naive individual in the relationship as well. And it made me realize at that moment that we were just two individuals that were in different areas of our life that didn't know how to be in a relationship together. And we were dropping the ball left, right, and center. And although it didn't result in us staying in touch, I got to tell you, my entire perspective of that entire relationship has changed. And I love what you said at the very beginning, which is the memories in many ways are now just stories that you tell yourself. And the story that I was telling myself before was nowhere near the story I started telling myself after that coffee date where I left and I had a realization that there were some great memories in the relationship. And that's where I'm trying to take this is the fact that sometimes when we come out of a bad memory, we only remember the bad things that happened in that memory. We forget that there were some extraordinary things that could happen. I remembered in that relationship, she pulled out a Raptors plushie, and I was like, oh yeah, we had this great Raptors date that we went on. Then I read this letter, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember when I went to high school and I'd like dropped it into your locker so that you could get it and get surprised. Like, I remembered all those. So memories start coming back, and you start realizing that there was not just bad memories, there were some great memories. And this doesn't just end at relationships. This could tie in with any initiative that someone feels like they failed in, someone that has a really bitter taste in. You walk away from that memory and you think it was nothing but bad things because of the final outcome. But when you spend some time looking into it, you remember those like tedious little moments that sometimes you forget. The maybe that one laugh that you had with your group project, that good conversation. Maybe the fact that it was a late night one day and you went out and got a cup of coffee and it was a great memory there. Like, things happen in the micro that we forget because of the macro, And because of that, in my opinion, is one of the best reasons to not only document but revisit it at a better headspace, is to remind yourself that bad things aren't only bad things. It's usually a combination of some great things as well. And sometimes those get forgotten, especially when you really have a bad taste in your mouth from that experience.
For sure. With what you described, which by the way, thanks for sharing. That was very touching. Like it's such an important thing to remember too. That like, for instance, for me, and I'm pretty sure for most people in general, when when you go through an experience like a failure or a mistake, you get hurt and you feel that emotion. But what happens is instantly your ego gets hurt and wants to defend yourself. And what I really like is the Buddhist tradition way of thinking that you have your ego, which is called the ahamkara, I think, in Sanskrit, and it recruits your mind to actually start creating reasons for why that failure is justified and why you don't need it anyway, or why the other person, if it was done by another person, isn't even worth your time. So automatically, you start creating this logic. You have an emotional response, but you start attaching logic to it and start creating the story, and you just completely detach yourself from the actual emotion of the experience, and you start creating this story that's only bad or whatever that serves you in the way that it defends who you are as a person or who you think you are as a person, but that's not you either. And that's just a natural response all of us have. To learn to let go of that is challenging, and that's why you have to somehow be able to step away from yourself. And I even notice that sometimes too, where I have a mistake, and in my head I think, oh, I didn't need that anyway, like this is a waste of my time, why am I being so emotional about it, who cares? And when I catch myself doing that, then I tell myself this is just my ego talking, and then that clues me in to think about this more, and sometimes to write it down. And that's what helps me actually process it through and actually extract the lessons there, but also to digest that emotion. And what I found very helpful, which is another Buddhist tradition to do, because they call these uh, like there's something called the samskara, which is a kind of ball. The best way I've heard of someone describe it is a ball of undigested emotions that you have attached to memories. And so when you revisit the memories, or when someone triggers anxiety or something, and you just wonder, like, why am I overreacting to this situation? Or why am I feeling this intensely about it? It's usually from a past memory as well that's also hasn't been processed through. And one of those things that I had to learn is that that memory from when it happened, you're at that age. So if you have such an intense reaction, it could even start from, let's say, age of 6. And you have to remember that you cannot fight your reaction at the age of 6 as someone like now and being cruel, being like, you're overreacting, you're being stupid. It doesn't make sense. You wouldn't talk to a 6-year-old like that. You have to learn how to be actually kind to yourself and work through it, and that's the way how you process it. So I kind of use these opportunities of when my ego feels like it has to defend myself, and when it starts recruiting my mind to create all these reasons, is I try to stop. I tried to stop it, and then ask myself, when have I felt this way before? And then I go and I just let my mind tell me when it has happened before, and I try to sit with that memory as long as I can, and then when I'm done, I ask myself, okay, when's another time? And when you actually dedicate a lot of this time, and the more and more you process these undigested emotions, the less attached you will to them, be to them. And the negative part of that experience will no longer affect you in that way. And the best proof of this for me has been doing extreme stuff like, the skydiving, the bungee jumping, and the hang gliding, and even like the edge walk here is when I did skydiving, which was my first extreme thing, I completely shut myself off. And that was a learned reaction from um, being scared of the military, of even like throwing a grenade. Or it was when I was a kid and like I got yelled at. And also so many traumatic memories of like when I tried to like kill myself and I actually thought I was dying. So I just shut myself off. And so when I started implementing this technique, the more I got to when I did more extreme stuff as well, I started being able to actually feel nervousness, feel this fear. And that was progress to me because then I can actually ground myself to it and then learn how to actually overcome that fear to integrate more confidence in myself as a person. But the process that allowed me to do that was actually going back and digesting all those undigested emotions, all those lessons that I had to learn to pick up again, and actually be compassionate to myself. Because one of the biggest things used to struggle with is I needed to distract myself from feeling uncomfortable with these emotions. So something bad would happen to me, and I would either throw myself into work, which would be studying, or I would throw myself watching a movie or playing video games. And all that was to not give myself positive emotion, but it was to avoid negative emotion. And as a result, you just shove it down. You don't actually work with it. And then you wonder why you're tired all the time, and you wonder why you're going around your day and you just randomly feel anxious. Like, so when that started happening to me and I realized that I actually was living on my own, and there was a point where I was in the kitchen just um like one of the YouTube videos was off while I was cooking, and then there was silence in the apartment. And then all of a sudden, I felt this like intense anxiety and like this pressure on my chest. And I was like, what the hell is going on? And I instantly like put on like another podcast because I couldn't handle the silence. I needed to be distracted. Learning that what I'm doing was the wrong thing to do, I had to learn to actually be able to sit with that. And it is a very, very difficult thing to do, but it is so important, like you explained, because we naturally will associate a memory as this is a bad time or this is a bad experience, but you leave out all the good stuff too. So, there are experiences I have where a friend has betrayed me, but the thing is like attached to that memory, there was a lot of good things there too. Like, when I was betrayed, I had to deal with the consequences of that. And, well, I guess I could just go into the story very briefly. But what happened was we were training the military reserves, and we were on the second day of sleep deprivation, and I had to like just lay on the ground and stay awake, but look down my rifle to guard the trench that we're digging. And so my friend had to relieve me, and he was taking my shift on that. But he comes up and he's like, "Oh my God, I think I lost my rifle and I have to go back to the instructors. Like, I don't know what to do." I was like, "Hey man, just take my rifle, go find your rifle because it's by the instructors. Come back, give mine back. You're all good." So he does that, and then he comes back to me and he's like, he's like, "Oh man, I messed up, cause I went there and the instructor was like, 'What are you looking for?' And he's like, 'I'm looking for Cause's rifle.'" I was Cause back then; they couldn't pronounce my last name, and so I was like, "Oh shit!" And so I went, I went up to the instructors and like, we heard, "Where's your rifle, Cause?" And I'm like, "It's right here." And they're like, "What?" I'm like, "Yes, Master Corporal, it's right here. This is my rifle, Master Corporal." And they're like, "What the hell? You're confusing me. Just go away." And I could have associated that memory with like a completely negative one because I was betrayed. But the positive there was I reached out to help someone. I actually did help him not get in trouble. And I faced the consequence of getting in trouble with that. And I turned out to be fine. And I was confident in the way that I approached it. And it made me feel good that I even faced it without being very like hard on myself and being very scared of the outcome. I just like, okay, this is what's gonna. I don't know what's gonna happen. It might suck, but let's see what happens. And that's the whole point. Like those are the memories that build up your character. But if I just said to myself, "This is a crappy memory. I don't want to listen. I don't want to remember it all." I lost all the value in that. So again, like you said, like looking back, there is always good in the bad, and there's always bad in the good too.
It's interesting. There's a bit of a difference between what we both said, and they both have valid points that are worth taking things out of. Which, when I said like there are good things that happens in the experience, but not necessarily the exact moment that makes it a bad experience. You came in and actually added on another stack that I thought was really well identified, which is the even the moment of the bad experience might have not been a bad experience. Like you've learned so much, and you also probably learned how to be a bit more cautious around him. You probably learned how to pick up those type of social cues in the future. There's a lot of things that you pick up there, and we talked about this in a past chapter, which is the idea that failure is not really a real word, right? Failure is a an emotion that got attached to an outcome, but the reality is these outcomes are just learning experiences, right? It's just another step for you to take to get better. And like my relationship story allowed me to be better with relationships. It allowed me to get a better read on the other person. It allowed me to have more confidence in my ability to be a partner and so forth. And your experience also gave you a lot of takeaways that happened at the moment that people would have considered that to be a terrible day. And you think about how often people say that, right? Like, oh, I had an awful day. Did you really have an awful day, or you had an awful moment? Like, someone cut you off on the road, or you were stuck in traffic, or maybe a presentation you gave didn't go as well as you thought it would. Maybe the interview that you just had didn't actually do well, but now you're considering the entire 24 hours to be bad. So it's amazing what we leave out, because all of a sudden our emotions let that one experience put it on a pedestal and overthrow everything else that happened in the remainder of that 24 hours. And it's such an important thing to note, because by simply being aware of that, you start to identify that maybe there are things that are happening in my life that are better than I'm giving it credit for. You part of the journal that we created. I was very intentional in that journal to have that one section that asks you what's something great that happened today, right? And it says it doesn't matter how big or small it could be. It could be that someone held the door open for you, or it could be like you just won the freaking lottery. Like it could be anywhere in between. But what happens is when you start asking yourself, what's something great that happened to me today? Your mind starts digging and sifting through the micro that you often forget. It starts thinking like, was there one good thing that happened today? And then you usually will say, oh yeah, you know what? Something good did happen today. And all of a sudden, that validity that you were giving to that negative memory is not as strong, knowing that there were also some good things that happened today. A question that I sometimes get asked in podcast interviews is, people ask me about, would you change something in your life if you could go back in time? Would you do something differently, is sometimes how they also phrase it. And I always come back with the answer that I wouldn't change a thing. As bad as, I wish I could Hollywood it and make it sound better, but I give them the truth. I literally wouldn't change anything. And I started this episode by saying I failed maybe 10 times more than I succeeded. I made 10 times more bad decisions than good decisions. Yet, here I am saying I wouldn't change a thing, because I also think about not just what I'm doing, but who I am today. And the fact that I'm extremely happy with who I am today. And I wouldn't want to lose that as a result of losing lessons that came out of what people would have considered to be bad memories. Which brings me up to the next thing I wanted to chat with you about, Camille, which is, does your mind subconsciously hold on to some of these lessons, even if you don't remember the memory? We are who we are today, and we act a certain way, and we're able to make good, calculated decisions without actually remembering what lesson resulted in us being this way or making that decision. So there's a lot that's also happening subconsciously. How much of that do you think is built up from the experiences that we had, and how much of it do you think remembers? Like, how much percentage of that memory do you think it remembers to be able to make you the person who you are today? I'm kind of interested in this, and I'm going to throw in a fully loaded version of this question to you. I'd love to see how you juggle with it, and I apologize in advance. But I was thinking about this, Camille. I am nothing like my parents. I'm nothing like my brothers. Like, my personality, my way of being, my way of communicating, my way of thinking, and my way of acting and who I surround myself with are so different from my family. And I was asking myself the other day, like, who do I credit to how I am the way I am? Or what moments do I credit to why I am what I am? And I was having a bit of a challenge figuring that out. I was like, who do I actually talk like? I don't know. And I was trying to think of my childhood friends. I was like, do I talk like any of them? And I was like, I don't think so. Then I thought maybe it was from movies that I watch, shows that I watch, books that I read, people that I look up to, and start mirroring some of the behavior that they have. And over time, I started becoming more like that. But I gotta tell you, I didn't leave that mental discussion with an answer. I don't actually know who to credit who I am today, which in many ways makes me happy that I'm my own unique being. But at the same time, I'm curious, do you think this happened as a result of these subconscious lessons that happened along the way? Do you know why you are the way you are? Do you know what resulted in that? Like, could you pinpoint, like, I'm like this person taught me how to talk, this person taught me how to act, and so forth. And every other question that I threw at you just before that, feel free to run with it how you want. But I wanted to get your thoughts on this because it's a lot. It's a lot, and I haven't figured out how to answer this one.
Yeah, I think there's just like a lot to unpack there, and especially since that is such a huge like question that I don't think anyone has to answer. Like, what makes you you? I I know a bit of what drives me, in the sense of personal development, and it how it happened was through like years of therapy. Essentially, is that throughout my childhood, I my mom was working two jobs, and so she was never well, like, not never. She would rarely be home, and I mean, like, she would come back at like 8 p.m., sometimes 10 p.m., just to cook dinner for the next day and then sleep. And then I wouldn't see her because she would be out of the door at 6 a.m. So as a result, I didn't really have that like her around. And then my dad was, I mean, he was around, but like he wasn't present, I guess. Is the best way to say it. So one of the things that happened is my mom started to coming to me as a kid around like the age of 9 or 10, and started talking to me about her emotional issues and her problems within the marriage. And maybe this even came earlier as well, but what happened as a result was that I felt like I had to, support her and be that kind of person for her, that would be able to shoulder on her problems and try to solve them the best I can. And what happened was that when my mom would come back home, she would be tired and she wouldn't and be able to empathize with me as much because she's exhausted, understandably so. But as a kid, when I'm talking about my emotional issues and I get either ignored or told that she's tired, it's essentially invalidating my experience and saying that having that dual kind of meaning to her, which is someone that has to take care of her emotion, and also I have to be someone that doesn't have emotion. And my problems are burdens. And as a kid, developmentally, your parents are your world. So when I took that lesson to core, and I took that when it came into social interactions, so I mean at school, and then I took that when I went out in the world myself. And what that meant was that I feel like I have to shoulder the burden of the world's problems and essentially not creating burdens of my own. That's why it was about being efficient as possible, not asking for help, not being able to voice my own concerns and be open about my emotions. It was always about focusing on the other person's needs and putting my own needs aside. And that was a huge problem before. And when I used to frame my whole way of being around that, it meant it was I chased goals because I didn't feel valuable enough as a person. So I had to improve myself because I'm not worth anything. And no matter how many challenges I went through, being military, being overcoming all my addictions, going into med school, and then succeeding with that, and then like working out and all that kind of stuff. No matter what, it was never enough because I was still under that lesson that was there as a kid. But that's where it gets confusing because that's where I thought my core value of personal development, like wanting to become the best version of myself, came from for the longest time. But now that I don't look at myself that way, that I actually do see that I have inherent value and that I can actually burden other people by being open about my emotions, I don't tell that story to myself yet. I still find myself naturally gravitating towards being more curious about myself and trying to become the best version of myself and becoming more honest. So I think I think a lot of that doesn't have to do with memory or even upbringing. I think your core values, sure, they can be taught in a sense, but I think how you prioritize them and what like interests you, I think is just unique to you, and that becomes separate from your own experience, your own memories, and these shortcuts that we make, the mental shortcuts, I forget the exact word. I think we use heuristics or something like that. Um, that we create to become more efficient can also be problems too. Hence anxiety disorders and why people avoid. But those I think come from our memories and our experiences. And I guess we can dig deeper on that. But I'm curious about your thoughts around this topic too.
Favorite part of the entire show when we start thinking out loud on a topic. I gotta tell you, I really, really enjoy these parts. What a good point you made there, about these drivers and the being that we are not necessarily being tied with the memory. And I think you're definitely onto the right path of what I think as well, which is we all take those memories and the lessons that we learn, but then we somehow plug them into our own unique experience, right? Like your experience that you had in your life from the lessons that you took were different from, even if someone had the exact same lesson, they would have experienced it and they would have plugged it into a different experience. And what happens in those in situations is that you start getting your own learnings. You said, "Oh, this worked," or "Oh, this made me feel better," or "Oh, this got me further." And as a result of that, you're now likely to take that on as a new lesson that you stack into who you are, right? You start seeing those as positive ways of thinking, and you start seeing other things as negative ways of thinking. Now, given you may not be right, right? Like the things that you think are positive way of being might actually be escapism that's harmful for you, like drug addictions, right? Like looking at them and saying, "Oh, that made me feel good, so now that's I'm going to see that as my learning and I'm going to start doing that more." But hopefully through good research, staying curious, good influence, like maybe the people you surround yourself with, and just being able to do critical thinking will allow you to really do a good job in identifying the things that are actually good for you and bad for you. But those learnings along the way, similar to like a choose your adventure type story, will determine how you navigate and also who you become, right? And a lot of those comes down to allowing yourself to actually have that experience, because a lot of people can take lessons, a lot of people can pull out of those memories, but if you don't apply it anywhere, or you don't give yourself the opportunity to experience a part of life that would trigger that side on again, you're not actually going to be able to evolve through it, which is why it's important to actually be able to live your life and have those better experiences. The things that you said you experienced from skydiving and going numb is a new learning. You just had a realization that something happened there, and now you got to pontificate about it a little bit more and figure out why it happened. And that learning again continues to evolve you. So I really like what you're saying, where some of these things of who we are doesn't necessarily need to be tied in with crediting someone. It might be something that happened in your life that resulted in you evolving and then never ending evolving. And it can be exponential if you really give yourself the opportunity to experience a lot of things, or even have frequent conversations with other people around it, where critical thinking is happening all around. You and I get this out of every podcast episode. We're doing critical thinking around a topic that is naturally evolving us, whether we like it or not. And I can tell you, we like it. I really like it. I love how I'm evolving through this. And we're allowing ourselves to do that, even though that wasn't the intention of our podcast show. It's also the case when you and I sit down and talk. It's also the case when I sit down with my girlfriend and we have a really, really deep conversation. Yesterday we were kind of talking about really interesting conversation around different music that we may like or not like, or different shows we may like and not like. And one thing I had a realization at that exact moment while speaking with her is that just because one person may not like a certain genre doesn't mean that you should completely shut it off or judge other people because of it, because you're giving yourself a lack of opportunity to actually taste and experience what that would have been like. When I think back to like like childhood shows, right? Like Disney shows. If you didn't watch those Disney shows, you actually don't know if you missed out of an opportunity that could have happened based on the story that was told in one of those Disney movies, right? It might have left an idea in the back of your mind that later inspired you to do something else. When you being a huge comic book Marvel DC fan, really looking into the stories of like the battle between Batman and Joker, we know it's more than someone dressed up like a bat fighting a guy dressed up like a clown. We know there's deeper meaning behind it, that is a comparison of good and evil and how they intertwine and how they balance each other out in a different way. There's so much deeper meaning. By exposing myself to those type of stories and dialogues, it makes me think a little bit differently. In fact, it probably makes me speak a little bit differently, and it also probably makes me do things a little bit differently because of the actions I take from that new way of thinking. So by giving yourself the opportunity to do that, you're really allowing yourself to evolve and do more critical thinking with more data. I also think about country music. I'm not a fan of country music at all, but I don't bash country music because I also know festivals like the Boots and Heart festivals are some of the largest festivals in the world. So who am I to say this genre sucks if that many people are going out there and celebrating it all the time? And by allowing myself to understand why it is as big as it is, what people are attracted to, what it is about the culture of country music that allows people to feel that way, it's allowing me to evolve and learn more about it. Which brings me back to why I think it really matters in the world of really being able to be resilient and bounce back. Is that if you're giving yourself these experiences to keep evolving, you're going to allow yourself to become better and do things better the next time. But if you close yourself off from these things because you're like, oh, this sucks, or oh, I hate this artist, or oh, I hate these movies, or I hate this genre, and so forth, you're actually limiting your growth. And more importantly, you're becoming a judgmental individual because now you're judging people based on the fact that they like something that you consider to be bad taste. You're like, oh, this is terrible, and this person loves it. So this person loves something that's terrible. You're automatically assigning judgment to it. And I think that is the detrimental cause of a lot of situations where people start becoming judgmental. The more you start becoming open to the fact that people have unique experiences, they grow in different directions. And as a result of that, it could be a beautiful opportunity to connect and learn from other people's downfalls and their failures and their knockout moments. You give yourself an opportunity to become even more resilient without having to experience and taste those failures yourself. So I encourage a lot of people to really drop that shield of judgment that is used to somehow prevent yourself from experiencing or connecting with other areas of the world. But it allows you to do that if you really drop that shield down for the first time. I was reading an article just earlier today, as a matter of fact, and it talked about how when we walk through a forest and we look at trees, we know that not all trees are perfect. Some of them grew in different ways. Some of them didn't actually look great at all. It maybe looked a little paler than it should have. Some of them like really got beat up because maybe it didn't get enough rain or sun. But we don't stop and look at it and say, oh, that's an imperfect tree, and that's a broken tree, and that's a great tree, and I wonder what happened with that. And we don't start judging the trees. We just see them as they are, a beautiful set of trees that you're walking through. Yet when it comes to people, we take that element out. All of a sudden, we look at these so-called imperfections as flaws, and we start judging them as a result of that. And I think that judgment piece is actually a big reason. As distant as it sounds from resilience, there's actually a huge bridge in how judgment actually causes a lot of people. Because if you think about a majority of the reason why people don't get up when they get knocked down, Camille, is because they're scared of what other people are going to think of them. They're scared of letting someone else down. They're scared of being judged. But when you get that part of yourself under order, you're more likely to get up because you know the main reason why you're chasing that goal in the first place.
Another thing to say about judgment, when you do that to other people, you're naturally going to do it to yourself. And you can always compare yourself to someone that's better than you or worse than you. And what is that going to do for your self-esteem? Sure, it could build it up at times, but other times you just end up feeling more of a failure, or you're not living up to the expectations you have on yourself. You create all these unnecessary pressures on yourself that force you in a way that maybe isn't even your path, like you described. So I think it extends also for those people that maybe don't see the benefit of dropping that initial judgment and actually trying to appreciate the whole context of the story, not and also the ugly parts of everyone's experience, the parts that aren't so clean, and parts that no one wants to share. Is that once you do that, and you can start eliminating that judgment from yourself, and once you eliminate your own self judgment, then you become a lot more free in what you do and a lot more happy and a lot more even resilient because instead of saying I'm just gonna stay here because this is the only thing that makes me feel good, because I can't do anything right. I can't be like my classmate here that is smarter than me because every time I try I fail because I'm not smart. You're judging yourself as not smart. So anything that proves challenging to you, you can just write off and saying this isn't me or I'm not good at it, so therefore it's not even worth trying. As soon as you drop that kind of judgment piece onto yourself, then life becomes a lot more free and you become a lot more open to the experience. We reframe like all these experiences, like you even described like the best example when you said like people say they have a terrible day just because of one moment and they let that thought linger on that moment and they carry it throughout the whole day. It just taints the experience of the whole day, and in fact just what's how can you even see it for what it actually is? Like those trees in the forest, you have to see it for what it actually is and acknowledge that people it's I think it's a German word, Sonder, which is the realization that every stranger has their own unique life that you've experienced as well. Like they have their own dreams, their own expectations, their own reality. They fall in love. They have all these. They have a unique experience, and then once you actually recognize that, it becomes very easy to empathize. And like you said, when you can empathize with the other person, you can take away their learnings as well, and you can evolve as people and have a genuine connection, which everyone, no matter what they say, wants in life. Why not be open to that? Why not allow yourself to have this kind of learning that can come secondhand through their experiences as well? And to share the ugly parts, because why not be the leader of that? Why not lead the life that you want to have? And why not be the example that you want for the world? So they can also open up in the same way that you do. And the energy you put out, more likely you're going to get the same back. So instead of being all closed off and writing off every experience as good or bad, and nothing is ever binary. There's always exceptions. There's always these little micro details we don't allow ourselves to have because it's just maybe it's taboo or like you said, like people just judge things instantly and because it's very easy to do. That's probably why as well. Like instead of actually trying to focus on what the person's actually saying, most of the time, I watch a YouTube video and maybe 10 seconds in, I'm like, I don't trust this person. Turn it off. So I do that and I could miss out on some great lessons that the person is sharing because hell, they even have a YouTube video and it could be a very detailed one. They must have done a lot of research. Maybe they have. But instead, I allow myself to have this judgment that prevents me from having that. And naturally speaking, it's just normal and it's probably very efficient when it comes to energy because if you're trying to force yourself to listen to everyone's opinion, even if you don't like them, it's very taxing. But to actually be like open to that and be okay with having that, then it becomes very easy to actually focus when you want to do that. Maybe you can keep those judgments for YouTube videos, but you can always come back when you have more energy or when you actually meet someone and actually talk to a real life human being and you feel that automatic emotion, you can tell yourself, okay, this is normal, but I'm not going to let it affect me. And just move on, and you can actually have an opportunity to create a genuine connection with someone that maybe you didn't have the best first impression of. And don't you want that for yourself too? Like, how many times are you worried about making a bad first impression? And what happens when you actually do? And the other person, like, forgives you for it. Isn't that, like, what you want? I always want to have a second chance. I want to be able to move around in life, and if I make a mistake, yeah, so what? I still am myself, and hopefully people will appreciate that in the same way that I allow people to do the same because I'm not going to judge a person based on the first time I meet them. In the same way that if I see someone that's struggling, I'm not going to judge them for struggling. I'm going to judge them for how they handle that and how they work through that. And, I also have to acknowledge that, they're experiencing a lot of emotions, so maybe that's clouding these things, clouding their judgment, whatever. But the whole point is to actually allow them that experience and to actually work with them if they so choose to allow me to do with them, then why not be open to that? And when you're able to do it outwards, I think it's a lot easier to do it inwards. And of course, if you do it inwards, then it becomes easier to do outwards, and that's what you can ideally strive for if you don't have that experience. But if you start practicing it outwardly too, then it becomes naturally integrated with who you are, and you allow yourself to be more of who you want to be and the best version of yourself.
It's very hard to get to that point where when you're watching someone that is maybe that maybe looks like a professional on stage and your mind is saying this person is wrong, like you almost by default accept whatever they're saying as true valid information, even if you don't know anything else about them. They just look like they're the ones that know it because they're on stage, they have a microphone, they have an audience that's not interrupting them. They're dressed like they're dressed for the part, they're being showcased by maybe a bigger organization. So all these biases automatically make you open yourself up to these openness. But I like that perspective of knowing that maybe you could disagree, maybe you could look into it further and see if you really land on what they're saying. Having that second thought, it was something that took me a while to do too. But now when I watch a lot of videos, I actually say like, do I actually agree with everything they said? It doesn't even have to be like I agree with this person or I disagree. It could be like I agree, but I disagree with those areas. And this is where the beauty of the non-linear comes in, is the fact that the information that you collect just doesn't come out of the speaker. You can scroll down and start reading the comments. You can get inspired by something a comment said, and it will make you look up another video. Or you could look up the recommended video section on YouTube and watch another person's opinion. There's a lot of different information that you can get that's not just that source that you started with. So you're giving yourself a fair opportunity to see if you really believe in this stuff, which can change your way on either direction. I want to ask you a little bit about this, is to battle the contradiction that maybe we're putting in place. Okay. We talked about this last chapter, which was the idea of unlearning and unbecoming. And part of that was very heavily on the fact that you need to work backwards from everything that has conditioned you and go back to that almost like that innocent, naive individual that maybe didn't have those experiences and didn't get scarred. But a lot of the things we're saying right now is kind of like grow through the failures, grow through the down moments, grow through the things that put you down, take those memories and lessons with you, revisit those memories. I feel like one listening might find the struggle between like, am I supposed to unlearn and work backwards and take that away as if I didn't feel that pain? Or should I keep working forward as if I did feel that pain and I should keep that memory in the back pocket as something that I keep growing through? Where do you feel like you lie between this? Because one of the answers that I believe, Camille, is both. I think you should pull from both extremes, right? Because unlearning and unconditioning means eliminating the parts of you, of your identity that maybe you don't want to be associated with, the parts that are really holding you back. But there's also lessons to take out of the memories that you do have so that you don't repeat those mistakes. It'd be stupid to think you continue growing, doing the same initiative and making the same mistakes over and over and not learning anything from it. I think there's a big missing piece there. So I'm throwing an idea first in the ring and saying both, pull from both extremes. And I actually don't think it's a contradiction, but I wanted to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I don't think it's a contradiction either. I think it's maybe a misrepresentation because it's not that like you're all automatically unlearning this conditioning. It's more that you're learning from the experience and then you're choosing what part to stay and what and then how it's influenced. Like I mean, when I talk about working through the memories and then trying to undigest those emotions, it's not about unlearning. It's about training yourself to be detached from the like your initial response, because your initial response is fear or something, and that's not you. That's you modified by fear.
Yeah.
So,
And what's interesting is that going through those experiences also sometimes gives you the skill set to actually do the unlearning successfully. Yeah, I hear you loud and clear.
yeah, so I completely agree with you on that. I think I think ultimately the most realistic thing is that you still go through this experience like you've had that pain, and you learn to be able to one like manage it, or maybe even lessen it to a degree, and you don't, or maybe what I really do believe is that you don't make the pain less, but you make yourself more, and you make yourself stronger and more durable against that pain. And as a result, you just become naturally stronger, and you can choose what you want to do with that. It's not that like you have to unlearn everything and just be like, I discard every rule here that I've ever been taught because it's been taught. So it's not me. When it's applicable, and again, it can also be just a tool. Like you can take those learnings and they can be shortcuts. Like for instance, um, like math would be the easiest one. So you can create like mental shortcuts. And I'm blanking out. Oh, like for like 10 times 10, you add a zero because it's 10. Why not keep that shortcut? Why not say, okay, I'm unlearning, so therefore I'm just gonna have to learn from scratch 10 by 10. Like it, there obviously is always going to be like extremes to that, and that was essentially a straw man. But the whole point was to make that so evident that just because it was learned doesn't mean it's harmful, and you just have to learn what works for you and what you want to work for you, and who you want to be, and the best way to do that is maybe to keep some of those learnings. So
I
yeah.
love that, man. And I love the clarity on better defining what unlearn means, right? Because unlearn doesn't mean pour out everything you learned. Who would you be if you threw away every damn lesson that you learned, especially the ones that you need for your survival? Unlearn means being selective about the things that aren't serving you. But how do you know it's not serving you if you haven't lived life? And that's I think a point that you really drove home far better than I did. I thought that was fantastically said.
Oh, thank you very much. I think it is difficult. Like, don't get me wrong. It's impossible. It's impossible to think of every situation because the more you live, it's hard to be very efficient to like break it down. And I mean that's why, people have been saying they want to become enlightened. Where I think that's not like a state; it's more of a pursuit because like it's more temporary where you can detach from yourself completely. At the same time, too, I think it's just worth looking at these things because like sometimes you realize you're doing things automatically, and sometimes those automatic things aren't good for you, and then like you have a goal in mind, yet you find yourself like at a roadblock because of them, and therefore you can learn to kind of understand what's going on here, and then choose how you manage that, and how you manage your expectations around that, and who you want to be moving forward. I think that's where like, well, our talk about resiliency is very important in the sense that like we have these, so like you described, these failures that isn't necessarily failures. It's just what we attach to that as like this is such a negative experience, and I didn't get the outcome that I expected, so therefore it was a waste of time. I'm a failure, or this was a failure. But like you keep mentioning, is that there's so much to learn from that, and that makes us more efficient in the future. We can learn how to avoid or mitigate the risks, and have other successes. If we just stop because it gets to the point where we're making mistakes, then we're never actually learning how to become better. We're just stopping at the first part. So it's about learning how to endure that pain of not getting that outcome that you desired. I think that's what resiliency stems from, and then you can see how it benefits throughout like your whole life because you never get everything you want. If you do, well, I don't know what to say, but like it's such an important skill, and a lot of people don't realize that they're living a life that is just avoiding dealing with that uncomfortableness, and those labels that we attach to ourselves, like I'm smart, I'm a good person, all of that can actually be a barrier to allowing yourself to achieve what you want to achieve. So I think that's why it was good that we addressed that.
You lose when you give up, right? At the end of the day, the game is over when you give up. And a lot of people have seen failure as the end goal, or like the end of the game, the end of the road. And that's not the case at all. It's an opportunity to better yourself, pick up the tools that you've got from that opportunity and get better over time. And the hints are out there. The signs are out there. The statistics are out there. Like, it's not a secret that the most successful people in the world have failed hundreds, if not thousands of times before they finally found something that took off. And they've identified over and over again, watch keynote speakers of your favorite billionaire, millionaire, business owner, philanthropist, whatever it is. Watch their keynotes and watch how many times over the career that they've repeatedly said that they failed multiple times to get there. For every one Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or whoever comes to mind, there's tons of people that have failed, but we only see those few people that get spotlighted. When I think of the moguls, the ones that are absolutely killing it, I can think of what, a dozen off the top of my head right now. Camille, there's like almost 8 billion people in this planet. Like, someone right now listening, grab your calculator and do 12 divided by 8 billion and see what number gets spewed at you in terms of how many percent of people are actually being spotlighted as the ones holding up the trophy at the end of the day. Like, it's such a micro statistic that I think the calculator will actually spit out an error. Like, I think it's that low because that's what we're seeing. That's what we're exposed to. But we're seeing it over and over again, repeated over and over again, that every single one of these people have highlighted that they've gone through failures endlessly before they became successful. But most of us, after the first or second taste of these so-called failures, we're not giving ourselves the opportunity to get back up. We're doing what we know is going to result in a long-term regret, which is we're quitting. And it actually makes me think about the movie Pursuit of Happiness, when young Jaden Smith is walking around with his dad in the middle of the road. I think he just got picked up from school. And he's telling his dad about this funny story that he just heard, a funny joke. And he talks about this man that's drowning. And he says, while this man is drowning, a boat pulls up and says, "Hey, do you need any help?" And the guy that's drowning is like, "No, no, I'm okay. God is going to save me." And then the guy takes off. Then a couple hours later, another boat comes up and says, "Hey, do you need help?" And he says, "No, no, no, God's going to save me." And the boat takes off. And eventually the guy drowns and he goes off to heaven and he storms to God. And he says, "What happened? Why didn't you come save me?" And the God responds with, "I did. I sent you 2 boats, you dummy." And I thought that was such a great story from the young guy played by Jaden Smith in Pursuit of Happiness about the fact that these signs are being sent to you. These signs are there. They're evident that failure is part of the process. Whether we choose to look at them or not is what it depends on us. And we're just 2 other people on a microphone that's reminding them. And we hope, if not our voice that finally gets through to you, is the millions of other voices out there that are repeating the same thing. To get back up, you have to go through it. I said at the very beginning, I failed 10 times more than I succeeded. But yet a lot of people see me as someone that's become professionally successful, right? I've gone through the failure of relationships, and I credited that to why I've become the person that's in the happiest relationship of my life. I've gone through the failure of school. I got kicked out of university. My grades sucked. I reinvented myself. I went back to college. I graduated, and now I got myself into the job that I've always dreamed of. I have my friendship with you. My friendship with you didn't come out of me out going to a networking event trying to find friends. I was in a situation where I didn't have a lot of friends, and I was very much a solo individual. And I think that I wasn't really looking for other friends, but by crossing paths, I had the opportunity to relate with you as someone that's also lived an outcast type life, that because of that, you and I were able to relate and become the friends that we are. I truly believe, Camille, that for the difference between someone that wants to be resilient and someone that's lacking, there's a lot of different ways to fire yourself up to be a resilient individual. And one of them comes down to the fact that if you just surround yourself with the right people and have better conversations, I think it's very difficult to fail. I think if you surround yourself with people that have the right conversations, and these are conversations around getting motivated by their stories and their outlooks, giving them the opportunity to challenge you and challenge the way you think, giving you the opportunity to leave motivated and wanting to take action, or actually learning new knowledge that you could apply to your life, or subscribing to experiences together that the both of you do. It's just very difficult to stay down when life gets that active with the right individuals. And to me, I honestly believe that that's the best place to start if you really want to be a strong, resilient individual, is to surround yourself with better people and have better conversations with them, which will truly allow you to get that fire not only every single day, but for a very, very long time, if not the rest of your life. What do you think is that first driver that someone can do that maybe is having difficulties? You know, I admire you a lot for how difficult the challenges in your life were and the fact that you fought through it. I admire you a lot. You, in my opinion, are like the definition of a resilient human being. There's a lot of people that may not have been able to, or may even be listening to this, that has quit things in the past or doesn't think that they could get out of this quitting mindset. What do you think is that first addition that they could add in their way of being that could allow them to be even a little bit more resilient than they are now?
Gratitude is a huge one, I think. Um, Being grateful for those things, just being able to like look at the positive for once, because like a lot of the situations I've been in where it felt like it was hell, I ignored all the positives. And as a result, I felt extremely hopeless and nihilistic, that there was no purpose to the suffering that I had. But when I became more positive, it became a lot more easier to be resilient, because I can shift away from that cloud hanging over me into a positive, and then I can see that there's light at the end of the tunnel. There's something to be excited about. There's a reason why I'm in the suffering. I forget who said this, but it's such a beautiful quote. A man with a why can withstand anyhow. And that's the whole purpose, is if you can ground yourself to that purpose of your life, or whatever it is you want to achieve, then it becomes a lot more easy to acknowledge this suffering as temporary, or that you can do more, or do more in the sense that this place that you're in right now, this failure that you feel like, that's not you. You just had a setback. You can appreciate that for what it is, instead of equating that to the story of your life. Is that no matter what you do, you're going to fail. I think if I learned gratitude when I was 15, I probably wouldn't have gone as far down these rock bottoms as I have. And I would have been able to push through a lot of the pain so much more easily. I had to say, in the military, like, there were a lot of challenges where there were so many times I wanted to quit. And, like, I mean, is being sleep deprived for 3 days, and then digging trenches all those 72 hours, and then trying your best not to get caught, like trying to take like 3 minute nap, and still having to run around and then do a battle fitness test at the end of the 3 days after packing up your whole trench. It was very physically demanding. And what got me through that was that light at the end of the tunnel, saying that I'm doing this so someone else doesn't have to. I wanted, because my purpose as a soldier was to take the position that someone else wouldn't have to go through, and that I can endure the suffering, and in that way I can remove some of the burden on another person. And just telling that to myself over and over allowed me to be like, okay, I just got to keep going and do my best, because if I quit, it makes it a lot more harder for everyone else. And at the time, what I didn't realize, it would have made it a lot more harder for me too. Having gratitude, honestly, is a big shortcut. And even now, when I get burnt out, it's the first thing I focus on. When I become moody and like sad, depressed, the first thing I do is start gratitude journal or challenge where I have to do gratitude every day. And I think I attribute that to be one of the fastest ways for me to bounce back.
And you know, they call it practicing gratitude. And the reason the word practicing is in play is that it's something that you need to work towards to make it a habit, and it's something that you could get better at over time. So for those of you that are maybe trying gratitude for the first time, that maybe haven't figured out or didn't feel like it was very effective, know that it's something you need to practice and be consistent with. And it's something that I do every single morning. And I got to tell you, it's very difficult to let small negative things get in the way when I'm grateful for the things that I've highlighted first thing in the morning, and sometimes they're small things, sometimes they're massive, and sometimes they're the things that we share with the world, the sun coming up, the air that we breathe, the roof over our head, the fact that sometimes we get to do the things we want to do in our life, that we chose to do these things, that these kind of things make me excited. This podcast right here, there is no job description that's telling us we need to do this. There's no salary saying we're going to get fired if we don't record an episode. You and I, we chose to do this. And things like that, when you start identifying the things that you get to do because you chose to do it, it gets quite beautiful because that list becomes a lot larger than you think. Camille, I want to finish this on a fun note, and I want to read out one of my favorite Drake quotes of all time, where he says, "Some nights I wish I could go back in life, not to change shit, just to feel a couple things twice." So, if you could go back in time and not change things, but relive it, just to relive it one more time, while we're talking about gratitude, something that you're so grateful for that you just want to go and relive it again. What's a memory in your past that you would relive a second time if you could?
It's a tie between when I graduated from my military course and the time when I graduated from med school. So, so yes, let's go with the med school
Graduation,
one.
huh? All right, graduation is one. Okay, so let's relive it verbally. Like walk me through, pick one of those two and walk me through the experience for the viewers. Like what was that experience like? Let's relive it together.
So, graduating med school, I I studied in Poland, and we have like a bunch of international students, like from Ireland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark. I'm a Canadian, and like other countries as well. So, when when the virus hit, we were pretty much like separated. Everyone went to their own countries. They stayed and they studied, and I didn't see them for like a year and a half. When graduation came, after we'd done the exams, we got together. We got to party, and it was nice seeing everyone again. And even though there was all that pain of saying goodbye and knowing that this is probably the last time I'm going to see these people, at least for a long time, just being able to celebrate the fact that we went through 6 years of very challenging times, like exams, studying, and like these a lot of negative experiences too. But we went through them together, and we had a lot of fun together. We got to know each other, and have and be confident in what we're doing and what we're learning, and having these funny stories and stuff, and then like talking to these people, and I guess knowing that this is the last time I'm going to see them, it opened up a lot of new conversation pieces, and the fact that I didn't see them for a year and a half, and a lot of that was gratitude for each other, like actually verbalizing how grateful we are for being able to meet each other, and how sad it is that we'll probably never see each other again, but um, what we learned from each other, and what we really liked about each other. I think sharing that, feeling all that connection, and being and finally like closing this chapter of my life, and being able to look back together on like some of the like crappy experiences, and seeing who I was then versus who I am now, I think was so beautiful, yet like it's so painful at the same time even now thinking about it. But I'd like to to revisit that and re-experience that again.
And it's such a beautiful memory. And is it just me, or it's the fact that you got to taste crap so many times during the hard days that made you appreciate that breath of fresh air at the end of the tunnel more,
Yeah.
right? Like you wouldn't have appreciated it as much, or the conversations wouldn't have gone as deep if all it was just wins along the way and it was too easy, right? It wouldn't even feel like I don't even think this would have made your list of the top memory that you want to visit.
Yeah, that's true. I thought for a long time too that that it was almost too easy, even that. But it's because I didn't acknowledge how difficult it was and how much I prepared for that.
I thought
And
you were just gonna say it's because you're a genius,
uh,
and it was
yeah, sure.
I was gonna love it too.
Yeah, no, definitely not. I just but you're right because of the negative stuff. Because a lot of the funniest stories come from these like failures and mistakes we make, and like then uh, you know also being able to revisit like those times where it's been tough does make the whole memory sweeter and the whole experience even more rewarding, because these were times where these challenges we didn't feel safe in the same when we were challenged. And that's the whole part, like that is how a real challenge is supposed to be, is that you're trying to become more by stepping out of your comfort zone. When it becomes comfortable and you know you're going to overcome all those challenges don't feel worthwhile, they don't build the same character. Confidence is not about success. Confidence is about taking that step into the unknown, and that's the whole point of being uncomfortable in these situations.
I'll tell you this, it's going to be very, very tough to indicate which quote from Camille we want to spotlight from the chapter because, man, you are dropping some high value gems. I'll tell you that. It's beautiful. And this is a true testament to the value of having those hard days and the fact that it's necessary for the full story to feel as good as it did. As a matter of fact, if it was too easy, what would happen through human nature is that we would keep lifting up the bar until it becomes too hard. Like it would just be boring. You'd be like, I need things to be a little bit harder. I need a little bit more excitement in the challenge. And when it starts becoming, as the word states, challenging, it's then going to result in you not being able to execute the way you want to, which then creates my favorite thing, which is the beautiful nonlinear, where you get shocked by life with how things unfold based on the fact that it didn't happen as planned. So you embrace it. You understand that it's because of those hard days and bad days that you appreciate the end of the tunnel. Otherwise, it wouldn't be appreciated. And when you start realizing that more, you start understanding that the things that are worth revisiting in your life are the ones that really came out of resilience and came out of bouncing back from difficult days. I passed my 10 years with Candy Box, the marketing agency that I'm with, this year. And I was proud to come out and say that I can finally say I've been doing something for a decade. It's very rare that that's something you live your life and you look back and you said, I've done, you're only going to do a small handful of things for a decade consistently. And working at this marketing agency full time for 10 years straight, I can't even believe that it's true, but it's true. And, I went out to dinner with Priya that weekend to celebrate. And I was thinking back and reflecting back of that 10 years. And I got to tell you, we spent most of the time talking about those hard, long days where we spent a lot of nights like working away because we had to get shit done. And those are the ones I remembered. Those are the ones I actually appreciated. And it made me realize now that when things get difficult, I actually try to be more in the present to better remember it. Because when I was trying to flash back 10 years and think about like, oh, remember in year 4 when this really bad thing happened? I could barely remember it. I just knew it was a bad thing. I actually wish I remembered in better detail so that I could really appreciate the fact that I overcame it. I try to remember those challenges rather than try to stray away and run away from it because I can tell you after 10 years, it's the hardest days that I appreciated the most. The fact that I overcame the hardest days. To selfishly answer my revisit question, I was thinking about this just now, and I think I would either revisit my book launch event because of the same reasons as you outlined with your difficult years that you put in to bring something to life. The work that goes in physically and emotionally to bring something like that to life and feeling good about it once you see it in your hand as a tangible book. But the other one that came to mind was I almost just kind of want to revisit my first date with Priya out of curiosity because I can't remember much except the fact that it was very, very awkward. If I knew our relationship would be where it was, I would have been like taking notes of every part of that date because now I look back and I'm like, man, I wish I remembered how it was kind of weird that first date. I actually showed up with a t-shirt that said perfect as I am, like a douchebag. It actually said perfect as I am on my shirt. And I remember wearing it, but fortunately it had a good story because I actually got that at an event that I spoke at that was very big on being like not judging and accepting yourself. So it resulted in a great story. But reliving that will help me realize that it didn't have to be perfect. To your point about the first impression, I wouldn't say I made the best first impression. I think I did okay. She would probably even say I did pretty good, but I don't think I made the best first impression. But now I'm in the happiest relationship of my life. And it's interesting to point out that you can still make it in the things that you want to make it to by falling a few times, stumbling, rolling, crawling, or flying. You'll still find a way to get there. And in fact, the more you fell down, the more you'll appreciate the fact that you finally got there. And I think when you look back at what you and I both want to revisit, a lot of it comes down to the fact that neither of them were handed to us. They were not easy. It was difficult, and it came out with a happy ending. But the reoccurring trend is the fact that we didn't give up when things were hard. We muscled our way through it.
Yeah, it's beautiful to think that. I love your answer about revisiting your first date with Priya because that would be amazing to think. Like, it's been a long time and you guys are great together, and just to like look back to almost seeing her as a stranger would be a very cool juxtaposition to now. So, man, it's so important to think about these challenges we overcome and being grateful for them. And I think that's why that's a huge part of resilience. Resilience without gratitude, I have to say, it's still possible, but it's a lot harder and it's a lot more cold and doesn't feel like living. It feels like more surviving. So I think being able to have that gratitude played such a huge role in my life and yours as well, as we can see, that I think it's just worth we keep talking, bringing it back up because it is so huge, and I think it's so understated the benefits from it, and it's almost counterintuitive to what people actually think because not even like most people can't even take a compliment, so let alone thinking about a good time. It feels so unnatural to sit with that. So being able to have that in the present to appreciate these challenges makes everything a lot easier, and it makes, in fact, maybe I'm the weird one here, but it makes me feel alive, and I think it's worth sharing that to other people.
We talked about the story about Superman, the superhero, and his evolution. And we talked about how Superman was actually considered a boring comic book back in the days because he didn't have any weaknesses. And over time, they finally started giving him some weaknesses, which was a great which was a great way of perceiving how life can feel unfulfilled, and it could feel like you're not doing enough, and more often than not probably go back and look back with regret, wishing you did more and felt more alive because of it. So you definitely don't feel weird. Like, you definitely are not the weird one for saying that. I think that's a well stated fact, that to really feel like you've lived your life to the fullest sometimes it's measured in the challenges that you've overcome, right? Like, how great was your life can be measured on the fact that you've overcame a significant amount of challenges. And I think that needs to be stated as well. I want to also just finish it off by just pointing out the fact that we've brought up resilience in many times in our show, and we called it failure once. I think we've called it bouncing back, and now we're calling it resilience. But it's no secret that this is one of the biggest pieces of the entire show. And I think it's important to note that for anyone that's listening that may be having challenges with areas of their life that they're struggling to bounce back from, I think this is a great reminder to be able to revisit any of the past episodes and use it as a strength to build yourself back up and really be able to achieve the things that you want in life. You and I are great examples of people, and we know each other's life personally outside of this show, which is why I can really say with confidence that you and I have really muscled through some shit, and it was very different shit, but we were able to bring them together and really learn from each other's experiences, which is why this show is even what it is. As a matter of fact, can I also go as far, and hopefully it's not a stretch, but I truly believe that this show exists because of our resilience, because we came together and said, hey man, we actually went through so much shit that I think we need to share it on a show. And if we didn't have this resilience, do you really think we'd be here talking about how great life is and everything is going our way and nothing is wrong? I don't think we'd have a lot of stories to share. This show was built on a heartbeat that we call resilience. And I think it's one of the biggest chapters that I hope we bring back over and over again on multiple occasions. And I'm so thankful that someone like you is this open to sharing it on our show. You and I talked a lot about our relationships off screen. And one thing that I think I've highlighted in the past, and I think you've highlighted in the past too, is that, I said earlier in the show that some people say, oh, you got lucky, or you're so lucky that it worked out. But you and I both agree that the relationships that we get into or are in are relationships that didn't happen as a result of luck. It happened because we deserved it. We earned it. We worked our way through resilience. We grew as the beings that we are. And as a result of that, we were able to become the person that the other person can love. And that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for resilience. So I don't believe anything that comes out of our way is luck. As a matter of fact, for you listeners, I don't think anything coming your way is luck. I think if you really position yourself, you're able to get there. There's a saying that the teacher will present themselves when the student is ready. I believe that the opportunity will present themselves when you are ready. And the only way you can really be ready is to muscle through these challenges every step of the way.
I think as well, like it's amazing to think about how these lessons almost stack upon each other, and then the opportunity just seems to come out of nowhere. I mean, in what we're talking about with resilience, absolutely, I think that this show wouldn't exist without it because, for one, if I wasn't resilient, or if I didn't practice resiliency, I probably would be dead. So that's one thing. But also, we wouldn't be able to talk about this and actually come from a place of experience and knowledge, and not be fraudulent with what we say, because like what we actually say is what we believe deep down, as opposed to having like borrowed knowledge that doesn't actually work, at least not in our lives. So why the hell would we share that? We are genuine, at least what we're sharing, and what we've gone through has shaped who we are and brought more of ourselves out, not actually done the opposite, which a lot of people think that you trauma shuts you down. And sure, in the short term, but overcoming it, that will build you up. And I used to think a couple of years ago that because of these experiences, I'm a broken person. And therefore, I'm damaged, and I have to just carry and shoulder that burden and have people learn to accept that. And granted, I accepted the fact that I was broken. However, it wasn't until actually just recognizing that these experiences don't define me. They have been a part of my life, but what I take away from that defines me and how I react. And so, in sharing that with people, I hope that they can see the same. That you have to keep trying, because if you don't, what's the alternative to like give up? Like that's suicide.
I'm not even going to add anything else on top of that because I think that was the most beautiful way to end today's topic. Camille, I just want to thank you for always pouring and opening up and really allowing other people to share from your stories. Sometimes we get private messages that I don't share publicly because I respect their privacy, but I've shared a few with you in private, and I've let you know that you're really impacting a lot of people with your story. So thank you for doing that week after week. And I'm excited to keep this chapter running, and I'm excited to keep the story opening up every single day. Thank you again, Camille. We'll see all of you next week. And I'm excited to dive into the next chapter of the modern mindset. Take care, everyone.